Enjoy your meeting.
For clients and
Just a reminder, today's meeting is being recorded.
And helping them understand how to incorporate their issues into their investments, and what sort of tools are available, and how that actually moves forward. So it's good to be with you and have a chance to have this conversation with you. So this conversation is really focused on biblically responsible investing, but I thought it would be helpful to talk at least briefly about all of the other labels that are sometimes put on this the style of investing, which is about taking the values of investors and applying them to their investments. And so we hear about SRI, or socially responsible investing. We hear the term ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues. We hear about positive screening and negative screening. We hear about divestment. We hear about values-based investing. All of those concepts behind the scenes are based on the same basic set of research and issues. They certainly have different motivations that bring investors to the table, and they certainly can be applied in different ways and have different areas of emphasis. But there is an incredible amount of overlap at the research level and at the operational level in terms of the strategies that are employed in order to apply an end client's values to their investments. And so for you acting as an intermediary for your clients, I thought it would be helpful to acknowledge that and just talk a little bit about that fact, so that if someone comes in using a slightly different label than you typically use, you have a framework for thinking about how their label, their questions apply to the way that you think and talk about biblically responsible investing. So with that sort of backdrop, what I'd like to do today is talk about a series of things that will give you a framework and a background for understanding what's going on when we talk about biblically responsible investing or use any of these other labels. Look at some of the specific mechanics that are used in applying these kinds of values into an investment process. Look at the original sources that are used by ESG vendors to develop the research and tools. To look at what some of those specific vendors, who some of those specific vendors are by name. To look at some of the basic types of investment where values investing is available, and then have a brief conversation about some of the differences that you may see among clients when they come in, and recognition that all clients that walk through the door are not going to have exactly the same set of values, but that there can be incredible overlap in those values as folks come in. So I want to start with one of the core concepts and one of the most frequently requested concepts when you're looking at values-based investing or biblically responsible investing, and that's screening. And so one of the first ways in which screening can be applied is what I call a bright line standard, that there is a very specific criteria that is applied. It has a very specific definition, and at least theoretically, and this helps you remember that this is a standard instead of comparative kind of concept. At least theoretically, when you have a bright line standard within a given universe of companies, every company could theoretically fail that bright line standard, or every company could be acceptable when compared to that bright line standard. It's a standard, so there's no comparison of companies to one another. It's just they either meet the criteria for exclusion or they don't. Frequently, these standards are set against industry involvement. So is it a tobacco company? Is it a company that has a line of business in gambling? Is it a company that manufactures abortifacients? That kind of language, identifying a specific issue and involvement in that line of business or that product line is one of the ways that that bright line can be initially identified. It can also be important to talk about, well, how much of the business is it? Is it the first dollar of revenue associated with that line of business, or is it that you're looking for significant involvement? So if a company has more than 10% of its revenue from involvement in manufacturing alcohol, then you would seek to exclude those companies. And that revenue threshold can be set at a number of different levels, and it may in part depend on the research vendor and how they've structured their research. So IW Financial, as an example, has thresholds at 0% of revenue, that zero tolerance threshold, 1%, 5%, 10%, 20%. And it gives you the ability to set those thresholds at those levels depending on what level of intensity you and your client bring to a certain topic. Bright line standards can also be based on, I've labeled it here, performance-based, but it's really to say on issue areas that potentially apply to all companies. When you talk about manufacturing alcohol, that really only applies to a small set of companies out of a total research universe. But if you look at contributions to Planned Parenthood, that is a topic that it's not tied to a specific industry of company, and therefore every company in the Russell 3000, as an example, could potentially make those kinds of contributions, and therefore it's an across-the-board issue. You're evaluating performance, not industry tie, and you could set a criteria that would say, if there are disclosed contributions to Planned Parenthood, then we will exclude that company from a portfolio. So it's creating that kind of structure and language for talking about an exclusion on a bright line basis. The alternative approach to screening is a comparative approach. So the first was a standards-based, where theoretically every company could fail the standard or could be acceptable under the standard. And the second is comparative, where you use language like, I'm looking for companies that are better or worse on a particular topic area. So you embed that comparison approach. These are frequently issues that are universal or apply to all companies. So again, all companies in the Russell 3000 have environmental issues associated with them at varying levels, certainly, but some kind of environmental question can be asked about every company. So when doing comparisons, you can say, I want the better half of companies based on environmental issues. And you can certainly talk about what the specific data elements will be that you apply to that. But the primary point here is that inclusion or exclusion from a universe, from an investment universe or portfolio, would be based on that comparison kind of approach. You could say, I want to exclude the worst 10% of companies based on a given topic, or I want to include in the portfolio the best 50% or 10% of companies. But in either of those cases, what you're doing is you're drawing a line at a certain comparison threshold based on an underlying issue. That comparison threshold of I want to exclude the worst 10%, that worst 10% could be identified from varying peer groups or comparison groups. You could say my research universe is the entire Russell 3000, so I want to exclude the worst 10% of companies within the Russell 3000, and all companies are compared to one another. You could say I want to exclude the worst 10% of companies in each GICS sector. So there are 10 GICS sectors. We'll compare only companies within a given sector, for example, only energy companies, and we'll exclude the worst 10% of energy companies, the worst 10% of consumer discretionary, and so on down the line. You could also do it based on a market cap grouping. I'm going to exclude the worst 10% of the large cap companies, 10% of the mid cap companies, and 10% of the small cap companies. Each has different reasons that you would apply it, and different reasons that you would seek to use that structure for determining what companies are to be excluded, and therefore what companies are to be included in a portfolio construction process. So what are the core research sources that all of these ESG research firms and vendors are using to gather this information? And when I talk about this, I'm talking about information from, so are they involved in alcohol, tobacco, gambling, abortion philanthropy, all of those kinds of negative screening issues, as well as what are they doing on environment, human rights, labor issues, political contributions, philanthropy, community involvement, all of those kinds of issues. So this is not rocket science, and all of the basic sources are very similar from research firm to research firm. A lot of it is based on company disclosure. So information that's put out about all of these issues in financial reports, on their websites, in CSR or sustainability reports. There's also information that is gathered from trade associations or industry classifications, particularly on the negative screening issues. Who's part of which trade association, and what kind of specific data does the association put out in terms of their members' involvement in certain issues. Media reports, information about, certainly information about mergers and acquisitions, oftentimes will be a first indication that two companies have come together where one of them had known involvement in a certain issue area, then that merged entity has involvement in that issue area. But there are also stories about philanthropic contributions, involvement in certain political issues that are relevant to various topics, information about environmental policies, controversies on human rights issues. All of these kinds of things can filter into the ESG research sets. Government databases are another source of information, and I put government databases actually into two different kinds of categories. One is what I would describe as mandatory company disclosure, where the government has a regulatory requirement for disclosure on certain topics, and then combines and compiles all of that information from various companies into a single data set. And from an efficiency standpoint, the ESG research vendor will get that government data set. But it did in fact originate with the company, and it's comprehensive because it's mandatory. So some of the EPA data on environmental issues, toxic releases, some of those kinds of things fall into that category, where it's still company disclosure, but it was mandatory and it's compiled by the government into a data set. The other kind of government data set is something like enforcement actions, where the government is recording their action that has an impact on a given company. So if EPA levies a fine against a company, then that makes it into a data set that ESG vendors can capture. If the Equal Opportunities Employment Commission levies a disciplinary action against a company, then that makes it into a data set. And then there are data sets that the government just captures. So if there's a strike or a labor action, then the Department of Labor captures that information. It's not an enforcement action, and it wasn't disclosure by the company, but the government data set records that activity, and it makes it a nice, from a research standpoint, a nice centralized place to be able to capture that information. There's also, there are a lot of non-governmental organizations and or advocacy organizations around the country and the world who are concerned about a whole litany of issues and spend a lot of time, energy, and resources working on those issues. And so as an ESG researcher, if I have clients and investors who are interested in a particular topic, and those investors have an affinity for a particular advocacy organization, and that advocacy organization is doing research and compiling information that's very detailed on that advocacy topic of interest, then that's a good source for me to be able to support my investors' needs and my clients' needs. So some examples of that kind of information might include on human rights issues. There are organizations that evaluate countries and how oppressive those countries are. And so Freedom House is an example of that, where there's an evaluation of countries, and that becomes very useful information in going into the human rights evaluation sometimes. Whatever side of the issue on gay rights kinds of topics, LGBT topics, there are evaluations by a pro-gay human organization called the Human Rights Campaign they evaluate companies from a pro-LGBT standpoint. Those evaluations can be very helpful, whatever side of that issue you're on. So if a company scores well on the Human Rights Campaign rating from a pro standpoint, then there may be folks who want to look at that and say, I would rather companies not score well on that rating, and so that those HRC ratings can become useful within an evaluation of companies from a variety of perspectives.
So Mark,
yes.
It seems clear that there is just a wealth of information out there now from a lot of different databases. Probably one of the things that has led to such a rapid progress and advancement in the ability to do some of this screening. But on the flip side of that, it can also lead to a little paralysis, I think, for people. There's so much to think about. There's so many issues going on. How do you begin to get your hands around that issue? And I'm curious if you have any, if you have any examples or have heard from people about how they've gotten started in this. How have they actually begun to use that kind of information as an advisor?
Sure. So it's a nice segue. There is a tremendous amount of information, and I started doing this kind of research before the internet, and it was overwhelming then, but primarily overwhelming from the standpoint of trying to find the source material to be able to work on, and then compile it into useful ways for clients. But now with the internet, an awful lot of the original source material is available to anyone on the planet who wants to try and go in and process it. And so the overwhelming piece now is very much there is so much information about so many different topic areas and so many different companies that it's just not practical for the average professional to go out and research everything that is needed to be researched on behalf of a specific client. So there are a series of ESG vendors who make it their business to do that compilation and build data sets and tools to manipulate and work on those data sets on behalf of others who need to use that kind of information, so financial advisors particularly. I think the first step for a financial advisor is to really look at those tools and find ones that will specifically support them and how they want to interact with their clients. I think the other aspect of sort of the getting started question is what kind of conversations are you having with your clients? Is this something where you are being reactive and clients are asking questions and you need answers to those specific questions, or is it something where you're being a little bit more proactive, that either you are trying to build a business by going out and specifically promoting the fact that you have a capability to do BRI investing, and you're seeking clients who want to engage in a BRI conversation, and or you're making a transition and you've got a book of business and a list of existing clients, and you're going to those clients and beginning to engage them on a conversation around BRI. So I think that proactive or reactive can have an impact on what kind of research resources you'll need available. The other significant question in terms of what resources you'll need to have available to you are what's the size of client that you're dealing with. Are your clients invested directly in equities? Are you putting them in with asset managers who are running separately managed accounts? Are you invested primarily in mutual funds? What's that style of investment that you're working with those clients on, and therefore, what do you need to be able to have at your fingertips to be able to answer the kind of issue questions that they're asking? I do think that it is very easy to make it very complicated, and I would say that that it's probably a good idea to take relatively small steps, and then as you walk with your clients through this process, determine whether you need to be able to go further. I don't think you have to be able to answer all questions from day one. I think an ability and a willingness to engage with clients and then be responsive as they have more questions is more important. I have had conversations with advisors who the lack of any capability and the lack of willingness to engage at all on a values-based topic or conversation has led to losing clients, and any capacity to be able to engage in that conversation has saved clients when there was a preliminary indication that a client might want to leave searching for someone with that kind of capability. So I would say step in, and you can figure a lot of this out as you go. You don't have to have all of the answers up front, because the reality is there are a very, very small number of advisors and investors at the retail level who have very much experience about this at all. And I think that there's a real willingness to, on the part of most investors, to figure this out, and they just want a partner in figuring it out. They don't necessarily have to have all of the answers immediately.
Terrific. Thanks, Mark. So we have about maybe 15, 20 minutes. So okay. I want to make sure you get through all your stuff.
Yeah, I will accelerate. So we have in front of us a list of some of the research vendors who are available. As John said, I'm the CEO of Ensogo Analytics, and formerly worked with IW Financial, but I've had contact with all of these organizations. I know really well a lot of people at many of these organizations, and would encourage you to have conversations with each of them. The core difference between is, are you invested in mutual funds or are you invested in equities, or a combination? Because if you're only invested in mutual funds, then there's really not a lot of point in getting an equity-based tool, because that just leaves a lot of work in front of you to do after you have that level of detail and information. But I'd also be happy to have longer conversation with any of you if you're interested about my perspective on these various organizations if you want to reach out to me. So I would be happy to do that. I do want, just by way of example of what research can cover and what it might look like, I pulled out some Ensogo analytics information just to give you a flavor of what it can look like. So there are two pieces that I'm going to show you. The first is looking at sort of the positive aspect scoring on environmental, social, and governance issues, and doing some comparative analytics so that you can see how one mutual fund stacks up to its peer mutual fund on those kinds of issues. And again, I'd certainly be happy to have a conversation with any of you about this more specifically. The second Ensogo analytics concept, again, just by way of example, is to look at, well, what's the exposure of mutual funds to various topics of concern within the biblically responsible space. And here it's a comparison of an individual fund to the median level of exposure to that each of those issue areas within the peer fund group. So two different kinds of concepts, the negative screening here, and the first slide was the sort of positive screening or broader ESG kind of concept. But just examples of the kinds of research that you might be able to get from these various vendors. So we've already talked a little bit about equities, separately managed accounts, and mutual funds. Certainly there are bond mutual funds. There's a lot less information on ESG or values-based investing available regarding bond mutual funds. Also less at this point available regarding ETFs, though Ensogo Analytics is moving in the direction of having coverage of ETFs as well. And then there's on the more cash side, community investment notes is a key concept within the values-based space, trying to get money back into local communities as one of the topic areas of interest within values-based investing. So the last part of the formal presentation that I wanted to go through is just an example of how different clients who come through the door may have different areas of emphasis and different issues of concern within how they want to approach investing. So I took a look at three different denominations and how at the highest organizational level in those denominations, negative screening is defined within those organizations. And so this is a graphical, pictorial representation of all of the different kinds of issues that can be included in screening and in building a portfolio. And what I'm going to do, as you'll see, is I'm taking this slide, and for each of the denominations, I'm going to gray out those pictures that are not a part of how they've officially defined what kind of negative screens should be in place, and leave in full color those that are. And what we will see from these three denominations, from Southern Baptist to United Methodist to Catholic, is some interesting overlaps and differences between the three denominations. So I'm going to do this, give you a little bit of time on each slide just to take it in, but not really say anything and let the pictures speak for themselves. So this is the Southern Baptist slide. And the United Methodist slide. And the Catholic slide. So as you can see, different people who will come through the door from a faith perspective are going to have different combinations of issues, and there will be some interesting overlaps that we might not have predicted, and some differences that maybe were more predictable, but significant nonetheless. So that is a really high-level overview of the mechanics, some of the behind-the-scenes information that goes on, and structures that are used in supporting this concept of biblically responsible investing. I would certainly be happy to have further conversation with you, set up a demo of Ensogo if that's appropriate. But at this point, would be happy to open up for questions or comments or anything that would be helpful for me to talk about more.
Yeah, it's just a reminder, if you do have questions, there is a chat button on the lower left of your screen, a little kind of chat bubble. If you do have a question, just open up that chat bubble and type in your question, and I'll get that asked. I do, Mark, want to go back to the previous couple of slides because I think it points to one issue that I know we at CIF take very seriously, and that is because of these very, even slight, you might say, or major differences between three Christian organizations, it's awfully difficult to create a tool that says this is BRI or this is not BRI in terms of a company. Does it pass the BRI standard, I guess, or does it not pass the BRI standard? Because there is no specific standard out there. And I'm just curious from your perspective what are the biggest advances in the industry from a research and analytics perspective that allow more capabilities in the area of being able to kind of provide a more holistic or a more defined level of research for advisors as well as for institutional investors?
Sure. So my entire career in this industry, I have worked for organizations that were research oriented, and because they were research oriented and because they had clients that really were represented the entire potential range of issue interests and beliefs and areas of emphasis, primarily described themselves in terms of the research products that they put out as values neutral organizations. And that really was to just say we are objective and factual in our research, and it is not our place as a research vendor to tell any client what they should believe and which companies are good or bad. It is our objective as a research organization to put good information into our clients' hands, and tools that will then help the client make the decision that is appropriate to their beliefs. So in that sense, that's not new, because that's at least 20 or 30 years old in terms of the first organization that I worked with. And Ensogo Analytics has very much the same sort of core ethos in putting our product together. We are about objective information and putting that into the hands of our clients, so that that an advisor and an end investor can look at a report and say, I care about this issue, and I've got good objective information about what the exposure is to that issue. I don't care about the issue that's right next to it, and so I'm going to ignore that piece of information because it's not relevant. I do think that for the most part, the the research firms have that same ethos in terms of doing the research. That there's not an axe to grind, and conflicts of interest aren't coming in and coloring what information is put into reports. I do think that that there are some organizations that are more likely to believe and present that a certain way of looking at the world is more appropriate, and their product and their research will still be objective and high quality against that belief for the most part, but their products will not work as well if you don't agree exactly with their definitions. And so I think that's something to look for and look at when evaluating various ESG research products. The technology is certainly there to allow end users to say, this is what matters to me, and this is what I'm looking for. We all know in other parts of our lives that customization and personalization is everywhere, and it's certainly possible in this area as well. One of the difficulties, I think, is for those clients who are who, because of the size of their portfolios, are going to be invested in mutual funds. It is a matter of choosing among pre-existing portfolios. It is quite easy to take a set of values and build a separately managed account of equities, and it will adhere very closely to to any specific set of values that's set up at the beginning of the process. It's a very different proposition to go out and try and evaluate mutual funds that are pre-existing portfolios, and you have to choose one pre-existing portfolio over another. So it is certainly a matter of finding a closest fit or best fit rather than a perfect fit when you're looking at mutual funds.
That's a great point. I think most people, there's a lot who are more in that area of the mutual fund, and well, the ideal scenario is to start from the values and work your way up. To your point, in some case, there's going to be some focus on best fit versus ideal fit.
Right.
And you actually started to answer, I think, the second question I had here, but I want to still ask it and then see if you have a further answer, and that is, what should be, or what are the areas that advisors should be careful or be aware of in terms of looking at the various tools, in terms of their limitations, so they go in with their eyes wide open?
Sure.
One you certainly pointed out there, which is you somewhat have to understand how much of the data is objective and if there is any subjective data that's incorporated into the tools. Is there anything else?
I mean, so some of the maybe more obvious kinds of things like frequency of update, universe of coverage, some of those kinds of things are certainly important, and the reason they're important is because you want to make sure that they match your understanding and expectations. If you're building separately managed accounts for your clients, or you're doing individual stock picking, and you only ever choose large cap stocks, then an equity research tool that only has large cap stocks as part of it will be fine. But if you build multi-cap portfolios and you like to play in the full range of the Russell 3000, a large cap only ESG research tool isn't going to be sufficient. So it's not that there's a right or a wrong in terms of the research product. It's just making sure that it matches what you're going to be trying to apply that research tool.
Sure.
what you'll be applying it to. I do think that that some conversation and discussion about sources is important. Some transparency about methodology is important. If the research firm either can't or isn't willing to have those conversations with you, then I would consider that to be a red flag. If they are, from my perspective, if they are a little bit too paternalistic about this is the only possible definition of some concept, then I would be concerned about that. I mean, all research firms have to have definitions because that's the only way we can actually get our products pulled together and do our work. So I'm not saying they don't need definitions, but if they find it very difficult to acknowledge that that they made a choice and that other choices could have been possible, then you could run into problems down the road with that kind of approach and that kind of firm.
So it's clear that similar to the other things you said, it's important to get a good fit not only in terms of mutual funds, but also in terms of the research tools you're looking at, in terms of the types of assets you're looking at, and the other aspects you mentioned.
That's correct.
Another key part of best fit or good fit in terms of a tool is certainly does it fit within the budgets of the customer.
Yep.
And so could you give just a quick snapshot as we kind of wrap up? What's the range of, as far as you understand, the range of subscription or prices in the area of the various tools?
Right. So I can only speak definitively about Ensogo Analytics pricing. And so Ensogo Analytics for the mutual fund tool that we have currently, a single seat license for a single advisor is $600 a year. If you look at, and I'm less certain about evaluators pricing, the U.S. CIF mutual fund chart that actually provides a chart of what issues are part of the methodology for a whole long list of mutual funds is actually freely available. And the equity data sets are going to be substantially more expensive. So IW Financial, it's an assets under management kind of pricing structure, and may be in the several $1,000 kind of range. The rest of the organizations, I'm less sure what the pricing would be, but any equities-based tool is going to be substantially more expensive than the mutual fund tools, in part because they have applicability among clients who have larger expense budgets.
Excellent. Well, very good, Mark. I really do appreciate you taking time today to go through this. It is good to have people who truly have a depth of experience and expertise to kind of help walk down this path of the journey of faith-based investing, which is how we view it. This webinar, this seminar, will be available on our website, on the Christian Investment Forum website, shortly after this call. And so people can go back to it, and we'll send you more information about that. Mark's information is also available both on our website in the area of tools for financial advisors, but also here in this presentation, so that if anyone has direct questions for him, feel free to ask directly. So again, I appreciate everyone for joining us today. I appreciate you, Mark, for taking the time to do this today. And we look forward to many more opportunities to discuss the issues and the state of screening.
Thank you,
everyone, and good afternoon.